So now that the Overwatch 2 beta with Junker Queen has been out for a couple days, what is she for? When should she be used? What's her place going to look like from a longer term standpoint? Well, let's first think about her identity. And some of the things that really jump out to us about her identity is going to be the lack of any sort of barrier or defense matrix, anything like that to really help her team rotate. The closest thing she has is her commanding shout, which gives everyone 100 temporary HP, throws on 30% movement speed. That's obviously really good, but you can't use it in ticks like Sigma, D.Va, Reinhardt could use their abilities to help their team rotate without it being an all-in. And she wants to have her commanding shout for the actual brawl itself. She kind of needs that. Okay, so that's one thing that jumps out. The lack of mobility, again, except for that commanding shout, which is only low ground mobility, it doesn't allow her to go vertical, is another thing that's gonna really be worth noticing about her. And then her range. We just saw Super throw a knife at the end of there. She's actually got okay range for a tank. It's not Sigma level, but she has okay range with that knife. Her weapon, of course, her primary fire doesn't do all that much, but she has some amount of range here. So what does this make her overall? What would we think about? Next, let's think about the archetypes here. Is she good against poke? Well, no, not really. She can't go vertical to get up on poke and high ground. She doesn't have that barrier to rotate. She doesn't have great mobility. Not going to be so good against poke. Is she good against dive? Well, that's a little more complicated. She's actually got some nice tricks against dive. Obviously, if she gets in a fight against them, people like Tracer don't like the quick melee that does extra damage and applies a bleed to them. It's pretty good at forcing recall. We've also got things where, hey, a Winston who's zapping her tries to then jump out. If she's already stuck the knife when the Winston starts to get low and the Winston tries to leave, she can mess up that Winston's jump, not only take away his momentum, but also pull him back a bit, and that doesn't go well for him. And finally, there seems to be bugs with Genji, at least from how I view it, where her knife throw will go through Genji's deflect and pull him back in, as well as hurt him through the deflect. Then he's out of position without deflect. That's not great. So that seems like, oh, Junker Queen's pretty good against dive, right? So it's solved. She's a brawl. Brawl's usually good against dive. She can also fight other brawl. That makes sense. But not really, because the truth is, if you're on Junker Queen, you're going to be with your other team. Maybe your team's going to stack with you. Maybe your team's going to take angles. I don't really care. A dive team is going to surround you pretty darn easily and poke you out. You just don't really have the ability to catch them. Your mobility isn't as good as theirs. And unlike Reinhardt, you can't plop that shield down and say, hey, I can put objective pressure on you, or I can spend my barrier while I'm rotating on you, and that's fine even if you're chipping me down because it's my barrier which I have. She's again in that situation where she doesn't have the barrier, she doesn't have the great mobility, it's just not great, it's too easy to surround and wear her down. So does that leave her in a more specialized role of like, well, she's a brawl tank that wants to fight other brawl comps? That might be okay. We've seen stuff like D.Va, who seems to be in a place of D.Va would almost like to be played with a poke team to help them defend against divers, so like specifically in the poke v brawl matchup. Okay, that could sort of work. Are our tanks getting more specialized? They'll have to if we're getting more of them. Well, maybe, but is she really better than Reinhardt or Orisa at that job right now at Brawl v Brawl? I don't think we actually know the answer to that yet. So what is she good for then? Like, why would you consider using her if we're sort of in this, hey, we don't really know if she's right for Brawl v Brawl and she's not particularly amazing at the other matchups? Well, here's what I would look at and say you need to think about. The first thing is, one of the reasons you're going to use her is for this knife. This knife is just a lot of fun and you can do good stuff with it. We talked about some of the stuff you can do against dive heroes with it, but you can do lots of other cool stuff like pulling people down off high ground, almost like you're a roadhog there. You can do cheeky stuff where someone's near a ledge, you stick a knife in them, then you rotate around in such a way that when you recall the knife, they go into the ledge, or maybe it's a lost fight and you knife someone and then jump off the edge and pull them with you. So you get that late trade, which is better than the straight out loss. And then you can do cool things like, hey, you're fighting a Reinhardt who wants to shatter you and you just are close to him and you knife pull him past you when he shatters and whiffs because, oh, he totally moved when he wanted to shatter there. So she does have cool things you can do with the knife, and that is fun. But I think the most interesting thing about her actually is how well she synergizes with Lucio and Brig. This is really good. When you look at Lucio's speed plus Junker Queen's speed, well, That's a lot of speed that you can stagger there. When you look at Lucio's Aura Healing, plus Brig's Inspire Healing, plus Junker Queen's Commanding Shout, well, that's a lot of sustain that applies to everyone if they're stacked together, and really becomes a bit of a monster for brawling when you look at it from that perspective. And the other really cool thing that her Commanding Shout does is it solves a lot of the burst issues that you might have run into with Lucio and Briggs as supports in the past. Their burst would have been limited to a repair pack and amp, but when you have Junker Queen, you can give an extra 100 health to your other players. That can solve some of the burst issues that come in. Is there still a vulnerability with this core to things like Widow, Pharah, Ashe, heavy direct damage like that? Yeah, there absolutely is. But this sort of comp just completely ignores cleave damage. It doesn't really get chipped down all that effectively from light damage. So you're probably not going to be chipping it down very hard with like a Tracer Genji type standpoint. Even Echo isn't going to do amazing into it. You're going to have to hit it a little harder to take it down. And it is, of course, a brawling force. Reinhardt swinging on multiple people. Do you really care if you have both of these auras going plus Junker Queen? And then you've got a lot of mobility between, again, Commanding Shout plus Lucio speed, amp speed, all those things. And you even do have Briggs' ability to sustain off angles a little bit with the packs if you want to have someone on an off angle, though honestly, the 5 stack together, this could very well be the new version of 5-man. Could you put a Moira in here instead? Of course you could. You could even try a BAP, but really, when you look at this, these 3 are very good together, and in my opinion, it's one of the best forms of Lucio Brig, which has traditionally been a bit of a throw support comp in Overwatch 1 because of what Junker Queen brings to the table with that second speed, with that, we'll call it burst healing, but in some ways it's better than healing because it doesn't care about the ever-present Ananade. That extra health goes on even if people have been hit by purple, which is another nice thing about it. But what do you guys think? Do you look at Junker Queen and say, no, she's absolutely great versus dive, you talked about some of the stuff temporal there, but you're underselling it, or no, she is absolutely fantastic, is in the brawl matchup, Reinhardt absolutely hates being moved around in his charges with his shatters, with the knife in play there, and as people get good at figuring out when they need to stick their knife in people to hold it there as the threat to recall it to move them, she's going to be even better? Or do you look at her and say, hey, you know what, number tweaks aren't going to be enough for her, she's going to need a change to actually see long-term playability outside of pug-type games? Let me know what you think about this hero, and if you think it is a good direction, or if you think it's fun or not. If you're enjoying the content, drop a like, consider subscribing for more thought-provoking Overwatch and Overwatch 2 content, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks, Temporal out.